Hello, everybody, and welcome to How I Learned to Love Fantasy Podcast.
Hello.
My name is Travis Oates.
I'm Dan Billet.
And we are your hosts. This is a podcast in which we talk about the things from our childhood or our adulthood even.
Yeah.
That contributed to our love of fantasy.
Yes.
And today we're talking about a book.
What book? What books?
We are talking about three books.
4 books.
3 books.
4 books.
The Lord of the Rings trilogy.
And The Hobbit. The thing that started it all. Yeah.
The children's storybook.
The thing that told a story in one book that it took 3 unnecessarily long books to tell in the other one. Yes, I am aware.
Yes. One of the things that we're going to be talking about today is vastly superior than the other.
And The Hobbit is that thing.
No, it's
yes, it is. It's not true. It's all in the same gang.
It is true.
Yeah.
I think that, so. The reason we're doing more than just a single book is because I never read The Hobbit when I was young because I wasn't interested in baby books.
No,
I'm kidding. No, I never got it.
I just
for
assumed
some
it was 'cause
reason
nobody loved you enough to give it to you.
Exactly.
That's exactly it.
For some reason, and I don't know why. Like the Hobbit never came up. Now. Where did you? Was there somebody in you? Because you just said nobody loved you enough.
You're right.
Was there somebody
Sorry.
in your life that was the main contributor of literary knowledge to you? Because there definitely was in mine.
Sure. I come from a family of readers and professors, and in my family, if you couldn't argue your case, you couldn't talk.
Sounds awful, but go on.
But so I don't know if there was a particular person who did it. I think my aunt gave me my first copy of The Hobbit. I've had a few, including
a few aunts or a few.
I've had a few both. But the annotated Hobbit, which is the new one that I've got, and I don't know what happened to my original copy. It was my mom or my aunt, I believe.
You say aunt rather than aunt?
Aunt. My mom or my aunt.
I'm just curious.
Sometimes I say aunt. I got used to saying because if you say
I'm from
aunt,
Canada, so everything is mispronounced in a variety of different ways.
I lived overseas for a while, and if you say aunt, it's you would just so I just got used to saying aunt.
Aunt.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's great. That's
my aunt.
Yes, your aunt.
For me,
your aunt gave me this.
For me, it was definitely my dad.
Your dad.
If I would attribute to one human being in my life my love of fantasy and the enrichment of my imagination, it would be my dad.
Right.
My dad was an avid reader specifically of fantasy and science fiction.
Right.
He had a massive library of specifically worn paperback books. He gave me my first D&D books.
Right.
He all of the sparks down those paths were for my dad.
That's lovely. That's not. Yeah. I don't have that sort of relationship with my dad's not really a fiction reader. But I had a friend growing up. He was my best friend when I was little, and I feel like I owe him a lot. When we did Krull, all I could think about was Davy Olsen when we did Krull because we watched that movie 10 times, and Beastmaster we watched over and over again, and the Hobbit. I'm positive the first contact I had with D&D was because of him and his older brother. And
I had a close second.
Right
after my father, I did have my. I kind of young to have been, but my first love. Mm-hmm. I would say in my life was really a pair of twins, girls.
The Doublemint twins.
Yeah. No, it was.
Hi, Brett.
It was.
Hey.
Hi, Brett.
Hi, Brett.
Brett Sheridan is here, by the way, in the booth.
Just since this is a loosey-goosey show,
Sure.
Dan, point that mic at your mouth, please.
Is it bugging you? All right.
No, it's not bugging in terms of that's how they work. They have to point towards your mouth.
It's
The
broken.
professional
I'm sorry.
voiceover artist.
Yeah, there we go.
It's broken.
Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Yeah, so that's it. That's all I had for you right now.
No, so my Samantha and Tammy Kadji.
So you say your first love.
I love both of them.
Right.
They're in different ways, but I mean, both of them were very near and dear to my heart, and both of them also went a long way to. They were also avid readers, and there were a number of. They turned me on to Marvel comics. I was a DC comic person, couldn't care less. Samantha in particular, she got me into X-Men and that kind of stuff. And,
I was a big X-Men fan as a kid.
They really in general, got me more into superheroes. They were really into superhero stuff, but just wonderful. I haven't talked or seen either of them in years and years and years, and I'm sure they're not watching this, but
you never know.
Yeah, who knows? But
Hello.
but you two were fantastic, and I miss you, and you were a huge part of my life and my career.
I miss you too, Davey.
Yeah.
But I who was a really big part of the sort of early fantasy stuff, including The Hobbit. And,
So, did you read The Hobbit before Lord of the Rings?
I did not read Lord of the Rings until much, much later. I started reading. So I read The Hobbit, and I loved it. And then I started reading Lord of the Rings, and I got to the Two Towers, and where they got lost in the forest for like 8,000 pages. Sure. And I kind of put it down, and I didn't pick it up.
How old were you when you read The Hobbit?
8.
And how old were you when you read Lord of the Rings?
Well, I started it when I was
at 8 as well.
But yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a pretty hefty book.
Yeah,
for an 8-year-old.
and so, but I don't think I actually read it until in my 20s, like early 20s.
Yeah. I was definitely not. I was I want to say 13.
Right.
When I read Lord of the Rings.
I might have liked it more at 13, but I just remember it being like it not making as much sense to me, and the stuff happening in the forest where Pippin and Merry are lost, and it just felt interminable. Like it felt like it went on forever.
Sure.
I'm trying to talk into this thing. I'm just not doing it well.
I felt the same way about parts of Dune. Which I also read at about the same age. Right. The interesting thing about my dad was, among a variety of things, was also a nature photographer. And so every summer I would go with my dad on some kind of an expedition to somewhere amazing and beautiful and exotic. And if there was a book that I was having a hard time getting through for whatever reason, and I just felt like this is not something that, with the hustle and the bustle and dating and all the other things, that I will do if I'm at home. Take it with me on one of these and I'll get it read.
Right.
And that's what I did with Lord of the Rings. That's what I did with Dune. Any of these massive books. And I actually have my original Lord of the Rings here. And it's really worn, really fallen apart.
Well loved.
Yeah, well loved.
Yes, very
well loved by Unicorn Press. Let's see if it has the actual. I wonder if it has the.
So I remember reading The Hobbit and feeling really, really proud of myself. Like when I got to the end of it as an 8-year-old, because I was like, this is the first book that wasn't. I know you called it a kid's book and whatever, but that didn't feel.
Well, J.R.R. Tolkien called it a kid's book,
which he later then sort of said it wasn't really. But I understand what you're saying, and it is more of it's an introductory kind of book, and it's a different, and it's not quite as complex as some of the other ones, and so overly complex, some might say. But the Hobbit itself was the first book that I read that felt like a book that a grown-up would read, if that makes sense.
No,
I remember being really proud of myself and attached to it for that reason.
And I should also mention, I am calling this a single book because I read it as a single book. This is the 1-volume edition with index and appendices. And as a result of that, I don't think of this as 3 books because I didn't have them as 3 books.
Sure.
My dad has, and I wonder if they were given to me, I'd have to look for them at home, has a really beautiful bound set of all 3 books from, I think, the 50s. Like a really lovely, maybe even be leather bound. But this was the copy I had, so I always think of this as a single book. But this had all 3 books in it.
Well, I would say that almost everything that's good about the Lord of the Rings came from The Hobbit. So from Gandalf, like I love Bilbo more than I like any of the other hobbits. I love the dwarves. Thorin Oakenshield is one of my favorite characters in literature.
What's interesting
Gollum.
is this has like an index, which I think is fascinating. So you can like go and look up like specific things. It's got like a significant index.
Which pages was Galadriel?
Yeah, I guess so.
Dog ear that.
Yeah, but
It's like a high school yearbook of books.
I was gonna say with index, this is 1,193 pages, which would mark it as by far the largest book I ever read when I was a kid. Before. In fact, I'd have to see because I think The Stand would probably be the largest Stephen King novel I've read. This may be the largest number of pages I've ever read in a single session of a book. I can't think of, but I guess again it is technically 3 books. But yeah, and so I remember taking this with me to one of my dad's expeditions.
And he read it and
he
loved
had
it.
read it.
And so you were like talking to him about it and stuff when you were reading?
Yeah. In fact, when I was reading it, my dad and I would talk about this was one of my dad's favorites. I forgot to bring it. I was going to bring the Lord of the Rings game that I have a copy of now that my dad and I played. Oh, is it here?
I'm pretty sure it is.
Is it here? Well, we might take a break at some point and see if we can find it. Because we played that before I had read the book.
Right.
So we had played that a couple times. So I kind of knew the story. And I want to say that Ralph Bakshi's cartoon.
The Hobbit or the Lord of the Rings?
No, the Lord of the Rings.
Okay, right, sure.
The
he never finished. It was unfinished.
So
right?
it was just Lord of the Rings, not the Two Towers.
The Fellowship of the Ring.
I'm sorry, the Fellowship of the Ring. Thank you.
No, that's right.
So yeah, it was just Fellowship of the Ring, but it was called the movie was called Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
Which is why I think I still think of it that way. I believe I had seen that.
Okay.
So I knew the first book up to Boromir, I guess.
Okay.
I think that's about where that movie ends.
Where he dies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't going to tell everybody.
Oh, sorry.
Spoiler
alert.
Boromir dies
100 years later.
Yeah, in 6 movies and
many.
And a couple of television series.
So despite having read it, one of my earliest experiences with it was another friend of mine, and we would Matt Beck, and we would play the Middle Earth role playing game with a red box.
That was out back in those days.
Yeah.
Wow.
I would have been a little bit older, but like 12 or I don't know, 12 or 13, I guess. Where that was out.
And you and I do have an age gap, so I can't for some of that kind of stuff.
But I mean it's a little bit, but also like his older brothers were super into that stuff, so they introduced like the second it was out, like it was part of our lives. And so, I don't know that we ever actually played. That's not true. We actually did. I remember playing. I was going to say, but we would constantly be creating characters. Like that was always, in many ways, my favorite part of those games was creating the characters.
We should do an episode on role playing games that we never used for role playing games.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
For me, it was Traveler.
Sure. Yeah.
So there was a set of books for Traveler, and it was all about building planets and star systems and stuff. And I would sit for hours and build planets and star systems and ships using those and not one time in my entire life did I actually play Traveler. I just used it to create worlds.
I did that a lot with the Palladium system. So between Rifts and all the other ones.
Oh God, Rifts was such a great system.
Yeah, it was still going.
I know it's still. Do they still make new source books for Rifts?
Yeah, they do. I saw them at Gen Con. It was really cool.
You know what would have been really cool is when I slinked out there to go get that game. If I would have been able to find it and bring it in.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
I think I know where it is, but it's really hard to find. So it's not an easily accessible one.
Yeah.
It is a very nice.
And I'm still not 100% sure it's there.
I think it is because it's in a plastic bag. It's a special copy that I think was a gift for you. It's an old game.
No, I know.
Yeah, it was here at least for a little while. I don't know if it still is.
Could be. Yeah, we are getting a little off track.
Yeah, sorry.
But yeah, no, I've never even owned, and I own a lot of role playing games, especially if they're popular ones. Like I bought them voraciously when I was young, or voraciously rather than furaciously, which I don't think is a word.
Voraciously.
I mean, now you're not correcting my words when it might be entertaining.
No.
Sure.
No. Why would I do it? Of course not. Entertaining?
So,
yeah.
but yeah, I've never even seen the inside of. I know it exists. I know the role playing game exists, but I've never.
The Middle Earth role playing.
Yeah, but I've never. Oh,
it was
it
great.
up.
Yeah, it was very.
Is it? What is it? What kind of system is it? Compared, like, is it like, blah blah blah?
Again,
is it Dungeons and Dragons esque?
Yeah, it is.
Or is it more like Palladium esque, where it's like a percentage based and?
I don't remember. Honestly, it's been so long.
Skill based, or is it?
I think it's skill based, but I think it's a kind of skill based that felt. I don't remember it being D20 based. Again, correct me. I'm sure I'm wrong. It's been decades since I had it.
I'd be curious. I'd be very curious to see it, because I'd be curious to see how it deals with magic.
Yeah, let's find it.
Because I will say one of the interesting things about, because so I was very familiar and played extensively Dungeons and Dragons before I read the book.
Right.
So I was reading the book and experiencing the book through the lens of Dungeons and Dragons,
which is not the usual way. Usually it's the other way around.
Right. But I mean, it really was, and I had been told and read things numerous times that had said that, you know, that Tolkien was basically the, what would you say, spark of creation that created Dungeons and Dragons, like the elves, dwarves, orcs, you know,
goblins,
system of races. And the general system of ranger,
character classes, basic,
you know, the ranger, so forth. That came from him.
The notion of a party, the notion of the traveling party,
exactly,
like the whole
exactly. Yeah. And so I really did
dungeon crawls, all of it.
Really did look at this as, you know, being the predecessor of what was my favorite form of fantasy, which was Dungeons and Dragons at the time, and. The one thing that didn't fit very neatly into my perception of that was magic, because magic is kind of ill-defined in Lord of the Rings compared to a lot of the other a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
You know, Gandalf's abilities seemed very whatever was needed at the moment, right? Like he didn't seem to have a set power structure comparative to how I understood, you know, what a mage was, kind of thing. And most, I would, in the defense of Lord of the Rings, I would say most books have a fairly ill-defined idea of what magic is if you're a mage. They're all kind of like, I'm trying to think of a book that there are a few of them. I'm trying to think of other books that are along these lines. The Shannara books, maybe. There are a couple of them. I haven't read Wheel of Time, so I don't know much about that. But most mages kind of like can do whatever the situation desires if the writer desires for them to be able to do that in that situation. It's not like, okay, I'm a mage and I can shoot magic missiles out of my hand and talk to animals, and that's the only two things I can do. You don't see a whole lot of that with traditional wizards, I guess.
I would say like more now, like having been more influenced by Dungeons and Dragons being such a part of the culture, that now you sort of get, you know, but even so, like you look at like a Harry Potter, where they can all kind of do whatever kind of magic that they want. Well,
actually, and that's a very good point, is Harry Potter probably has the best defined.
Yeah.
Because because you are reading about them learning to become wizards.
Right.
So if they're in class and they're learning about polyjuice potions, that's going to come up.
Right.
Okay, I bet you they're going to use it to do whatever they're going to do.
But it also systematizes.
Or Leviosa.
Sure.
That's going to be used. And we know from that book on that that's a part of their repertoire.
Right.
I think that's probably the best example of that would be the Harry Potter books for sure. But so the Hobbit only has hobbits and dwarves, right? Oh, and then Gandalf as well.
No, it also has elves. It also has Bjorn, but
As
goblins.
not as main characters though.
Not as main characters.
I'm saying within the party.
Yes.
It's and I have seen, in fact, my son when he was 7, probably the best experience I ever had with my son, from an entertainment experience, was we watched over 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
We watched all 3 Hobbit movies, and then all 3 Lord of the Rings movies in order.
The regular version or the extended version?
The regular version. Okay. He was 7.
Sure.
Just getting him. We could get through about half a movie a night back then. And it was for him. And my son does not like watching movies. It's very hard to get him to sit down and watch a film. They just feel too long, I think, to him.
Okay.
He said he cried numerous times throughout the experience at the true emotion of it. And when the movies were done, I remember he was standing up, watching as the credits started to roll, crying, and he turned around to me and he said, how did he put it? He said, "I'm crying tears of joy for the first time ever." Because he thought it was the most transcendent experience up to that point in his life of watching that. And of course, he loves the Hobbit movies.
Yeah.
He gets really upset when people crap on the Hobbit films
I've never seen the Hobbit movies.
Yeah. Well, I watched them with him for the first time.
Yeah.
But because he watched it from the beginning, that is the beginning of the Lord of the Rings saga for him.
Sure.
So he doesn't see that as, he sees that as the beginning of this grand tale, and he doesn't know that, those films have been extended from a single book.
Right.
So along the same lines, that is my only experience with The Hobbit. I don't think I ever saw the cartoon.
So you've never read the book?
I've never read the book. To this day, I've never read the book.
Right.
I've never read The Hobbit, and I've only seen The Hobbit through the films.
Okay.
But it's most, were the films accurate to the book? Oh, you haven't seen the films, you don't know.
The films, so I couldn't tell you.
So it's basically Bilbo, a bunch of dwarves, and Gandalf.
Yeah, in the party, yes, the party that ventures out, and then there are, then they meet people along the way, and there's Gollum, and then there's the elves in the forest, and then there's the.
Because I know the movies were slammed for having a lot of stuff that wasn't in the book thrown in there.
Again,
I assumed like some of the elvish stuff because were thrown in there, but I don't know. Because I think Legolas was in the. I don't think he was in the Hobbit.
No, he's not. Right. Yeah, but a lot of that stuff is set up.
Well, since you've read both, which do you still think which would, if you were going to choose a book, which do you think is the better?
It's a very different. It appeals to a very different part of me. Like The Hobbit is the book that I've read with my kids. And we read it out loud, and they loved it. And we have not done that with The Lord of the Rings. Right. And part of that is, I don't know that they would have, and maybe now they're probably too old. But
Can I see The Hobbit?
Yeah, sure. At the time, I think we just got through The Hobbit, and they were super interested, but I don't know that we would have made it through Lord of the Rings.
Sure. I doubt it. The Lord of the Rings is a very dense book.
Yeah.
I don't think
but the things that I loved about the Lord of the Rings, like I was kind of saying, were things that came from The Hobbit. Gollum is such an amazing character in Smeagol.
And he started in The Hobbit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Sting comes from the sword.
His whole riddle, his riddle thing is from The Hobbit.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And so, and Gandalf, and the notion of, Bilbo is such a homebody. And
Sorry.
Well, it has no plans to leave, and then it is the child's notion of there and back again, right? So
Sure.
he gets to go away and he gets to have this enormous adventure, and then come back and be a little bit braver and a little bit better than he was, and I love that about the Hobbit.
And I will say this: the beauty of watching my son watch the films the way he did is Bilbo in the Lord of the Rings movies meant so much more to him because he was the hero of the stories that he'd watched.
Sure.
And when Gandalf, thou shalt not pass, does that whole thing and got lost.
Right.
I don't like telling my son what happens ahead of time.
Right.
But if I hadn't told him, son, Gandalf is not dead, he is coming back.
Okay.
That would have been the end of it. He was crying so hard
Right.
when Gandalf died.
Right.
I mean, to the point that I started to feel like it was child abuse. Like
Right,
I
sure.
had to literally stop everything and go, I promise to you by all, that he is not gone.
Sure.
And that, because he was so upset.
Well, one of the things that makes it feel like such is that that's a possibility, and this is where it is
Sure.
a difference between what we were.
Well, Boromir had just died.
Well, Boromir dies
or
before.
no, did he die before that? No, Boromir
no,
dies before Gandalf, I believe, right?
Before the Mines of Moria. That's the first one, because right, that's where they. That's
Yeah,
where
but
they
I
see
don't remember.
I think Boromir.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I think. But even in in the Hobbit, like there's like 3 of the dwarves die. Thorin dies.
Sure,
Fili and Kili die, and so the death of an important character is a real possibility,
Right.
and that's kind of part of what made it feel like a grown up book to me, and made it feel like. You probably made it feel to him like, oh no, Gandalf could die.
Sure.
Like that's.
Oh well, he definitely thought Gandalf could die.
Yeah.
I want to say maybe it was after Boromir's death. Gandalf died after Boromir. I'm pretty sure he did. So I think Boromir had already died.
Okay.
And so he knew that was a thing.
Okay.
But I don't remember.
I thought it was. Just
When does
after
Gandalf the White come back? He comes back during the. Because I think the "Thou shalt not pass" happens at what point in the novels?
think that's I think that's in Fellowship of the Ring. I'm pretty sure that it's in Fellowship of the Ring.
Jeez, I tell you.
Yeah.
And that's one of the difficulties I think of this is because so much of Lord of the Rings as a novel and as a story are these big set pieces.
Yeah.
And it really does become a matter of like, what order do the
right.
big set pieces happen in?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, sure. The mines.
And again,
the
because they're filtered through my D&D brain, I'm like, well, did they go through the mines of Moria before or after, all these other events? Yeah, you're right. Maybe Gandalf was gone before the Boromir incident. There are people out there right now
who are
watching this who are so
tearing their hair out,
painfully angry at me right now for my. And it's bad too, guys, because if you've watched me in other things, I normally have like an encyclopedic knowledge for this stuff, and the fact that But here's the thing. So here's what I've read Lord of the Rings once.
Oh, okay.
I've read Lord of the Rings one time. I read it that one time when I was 13, and I never read it again. Because I do feel like reading Lord of the Rings was sort of a huge Herculean task. Like it was a big, dense novel. It's the same with, like I was saying, Dune. I've only read Dune once because it was a powerful experience, but it was a big thing to get through.
Right.
Like it wasn't just casual reading. I've read other big novels, like I've read The Stand probably 3 or 4 times. But The Stand, the way Stephen King writes is it's not a difficult read.
Yeah, it's
right. It's a pretty.
He's super accessible.
Yeah. At least I find him to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas Lord of the Rings, it's like you say, there are entire sections of Lord of the Rings that they bow. They get a little long in some of those sections.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was during the Fellowship of the Ring.
I think you're right. I'm kind of looking here in the. It doesn't really matter, but
it is true the nature of the set pieces. So there's the there's the mines, there's the the getting lost in the forest, the time that they spend in Rivendell. There's the obviously the battles in Return of the King and the end.
Now here's a question that I do not know. I should have maybe researched this. Was the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, and Return of the King, were those when they were originally published also broken up into 2 books each? Because it refers to book 1 and book 2 of Fellowship of the Ring, book 3 and book 4, The Two Towers, and book 5 and book 6 of Return of the King. Do you know were they split up?
I think so. I think that each of the books was divided.
So it was really divided into 6?
Well,
When
yeah,
it was,
in its way, yeah. I'm pretty sure. But
yeah, I don't know.
we can.
The Bridge of Khazad-dûm. That was when it happened, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that does happen. That is chapter 5 in book 2, and chapter 10 in book 2 is the breaking of the Fellowship. That's where they.
In book 2 being
the Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah.
He didn't care when Boromir died.
No. Well, I mean,
He saw Boromir coming from a mile away. I was actually really surprised by that because I did not.
Oh, right.
I did not see Boromir
Turn.
I didn't see that coming. And I'm always I get really sad when Boromir dies.
Right.
Like
There's something that feels.
I find him a very likable character, and I mean he's he does represent kind of the frailty of human.
Yeah, it feels like potential that's not fulfilled. Like that he could have been such a hero.
Because I don't think he was a bad guy at all.
No.
He just was falling victim to the ring.
Yeah.
Ring's influence.
Yeah.
Yeah. I find Boromir very tragic for some reason.
No, I 100% agree. He is a different way of trying to seek the good thing, but the easy way.
So how old did you say you were when you read Lord of the Rings? You were in college?
No, past college. So I started reading in my like when I was maybe a year or two later, but it was not like I was under 10 when I started reading them, and then when I picked them up again, I would have been in my early 20s, like 23, 24, before the movies came out.
And why do you think it took you, just because the original, when you were way back when you were 8, that you got kind of roadblocked by it, and you just
remember
because by that time, the reason I asked, by that time you really knew that you were a fantasy fanatic.
Yeah, I mean, I knew. I will say that I probably spent some time away from fantasy. Like in my late teens and early 20s. Like I stopped reading comic books in the same way, and I stopped doing a lot of it.
Well, I never did.
Right.
Yeah. Like I in fact, if anything, the older I got, the more I got into it. But that happened because the friends that I were with at the time, and the twins that I had my entire high school life was spent with the two of them as my main friends. They were really into it too. So the older I got, the more I was into D&D, the more I was into fantasy, the more I branched out into other kinds of fantasy, like I said, superhero. I would say the height of me reading comics was that period between 13 and 18.
So I would say for me it would have been from like 10 or 8 to 14. And then I sort of went away from it and did a bunch of other stuff. And I also, like, once high school was over, I was traveling all over, like, between different cities and different places where I lived over the years. And I just kind of didn't carry that with me. And except for reading. So I still read a lot. But I didn't carry the kind of the hobbyist part of it with me.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was about 18, I think is when I had a good friend who God, I don't know whether it was his shop or whether he just worked. I think it was his shop, that he had a comic book / bookstore.
Oh, that's cool.
Kind of a lot of paperbacks and what you would consider a newsstand type setting. In the small town that I grew up in, Canada. And he was older than I was, but he was just one of those D&D friends.
Right.
You know how like when you play D&D, I remember one of my very first D&D campaigns that I ran had a bunch of people my age. This was early college, so I was about 19, 20. And then a couple 35, 36-year-olds, you know. One guy who was probably nearing 40.
Right.
You know, just because... that was the group. That was the group.
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
So a bunch of us, he didn't know anything, and then a guy who was married with a kid.
Right.
Where you were just like, practically nothing in common, with the exception of the fact that we were in the same D&D group. That's a short shout out to Leo Warda, dear friend. But yeah, for me, I really, really loved the books, if you want to put it that way. And it really did, I think it helped me be a better DM, I think, in a lot of ways, because up to that point, I think almost every time I ran D&D, it was one-offs. So I would run and I was the most popular DM of my group of friends. But most of the time when we played D&D, it was me designing a really killer dungeon or something like that. And then me taking my friends through the dungeon, killing them off one by one, and seeing if any of them can make it through, kind of thing. But it was really
D&D kind of was for a long time.
Well,
in many
it's
ways.
tournament style D&D,
Right, sure.
right? Which is what I also grew up with. When I played D&D at the high school, the art teacher, Russ Stasiak, huge influence in me, ran a D&D tournament every few months. And so that's kind of how I knew D&D back then. I didn't really know it as a campaign until I read Lord of the Rings.
Right.
And then Lord of the Rings, I think, awoke in the idea that you could tell a grand story within Dungeons and Dragons. That instead of it just being about a single dungeon or a single event, that was happening, the village has been attacked, how do you do that? That could be the spark that told an overarching story.
Sure. It's funny now that I'm thinking about it. I think what I also didn't like as a kid, in my 9-year-old logic, what I didn't like about Lord of the Rings is that the story was done. They had accomplished their goal. Like, they defeated Smaug. And
you mean the Hobbit?
So that story was done, and then it felt to me like, oh well, now it's about the ring, which it was not about really. The ring was just a means to an end, and it was something that they came. And so now this whole thing is about the ring, and it became. And I remember being like a little bit like resentful of like I had a completed story, and it felt to me again. It's just funny because this is coming back as we're talking about this. It felt to me like the sacrifices that were made at the end of The Hobbit were like less meaningful because that story kept going, which is not, as a storyteller.
And you didn't know because you were a child that those characters were stupid and the good ones were in this book.
Sure. That must be it. Yeah.
And I will tell you, one of the reasons why I have a hard time getting into The Hobbit, and I did start reading it for this segment, thinking, I'm just going to read through the whole Hobbit, and I'd be able to come in here and go, it's funny, I just read The Hobbit yesterday, but I didn't. And part of it is I had a really hard time keeping who was who.
Yeah,
there's so many dwarves thrown at you right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And I found the same problem with the movie when I watched it. Was I couldn't tell who was who, even in the film. When you have a visual reference for it.
Right. I think there are basically like 6 dwarves when there are actually 13, or however many there are. But there's like 6 that have personalities. Right. And Philly and Killy being like one, Balin, being
why do you think though he did that? He threw so many dwarves at it then, to have people to kill off, or like what do you think was the thinking? Because he certainly didn't do that in Lord of the Rings. There's not a character thrown in there that is not integral to the saga.
So you lose the enjoyment of the first scene if you don't have the big number. Sure, and I'm not saying that that's like if we're talking about artistic choices.
Do you think though that maybe, because I also think what I read of The Hobbit, which is just the beginning, felt silly. And I've heard other people say this about The Hobbit, that the book seemed like it started out as a silly kids thing. And as it went on, became more serious.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you could literally see the author changing his mind about what he wanted to do with the book page by page.
Yeah, I think that is in some ways true. I also think that if you like the actual the reason why there's so many dwarves is that these are it, right? Like these are the of the last remaining of that particular branch,
the last
of that particular branch of the ones that were like.
Is that the idea?
Yeah, I mean
that clan has been whittled down to just those people.
I mean, they're related to the other ones, but these are the ones that were like is my memory. It's not.
I mean, when they have the war, though, don't they bring a bunch more dwarves?
Yeah, which are but these are the last remaining of that particular branch that was descended from the king of the Underground. Again, my memory. It's been a while, but so them all being there didn't bother me. I do think that it does start off, and it becomes again. It's Gandalf comes in and he becomes a very he's trying to take this very staid, boring, terrified, afraid creature and say, it's okay to go on an adventure. It's okay to change.
Sure.
Okay
I'm just saying at the beginning, it feels a little bit like the Cat in a Hat with like all the dwarves coming in, right?
Sure.
For those of you who haven't read the Cat in a Hat for a while, I mean, the original, you got the two kids and the cat just keeps getting wrecking stuff and they're running around like trying to and that kind of felt like, to me, like, you had the one hobbit, and then they started wrecking his place, and he was running around trying to stop them from wrecking his place, kind of thing. There was a little bit of that feel to it going on.
Yeah, it had a bit,
and
of
it was being played for comedy.
It has a bit of a sense of humor, which I felt
which is not.
That's what I was about to say.
Lord
Is I feel that takes itself so seriously.
Oh, for sure.
That it was also part of I think why I didn't love it.
Oh yeah, Lord of the Rings is not a funny book. I don't know if there's a funny moment in Lord of the Rings. Maybe somewhere in there. I'm trying to think of some of the interaction between Gimli and Legolas. Maybe is on the funny side. The one thing I will say,
the all the meals that the Hobbit.
Sure.
That's funny.
But the Hobbit I think was already established here. I think Hobbit, just hobbits in general, were kind of, and so he was kind of stuck with that to a certain extent when he started this, right? Because he wanted it to branch off of that. He wanted it to be of the same world.
Can I also tell you one of the? Oh, go ahead. I'll let you.
I was just going to say the one real curious thing about Lord of the Rings that I still haven't seen done, the book that I haven't seen done in any other medium. One of my favorite parts of this book is when Frodo gets back and has to fix his hometown. His home village has kind of been taken over by fascist elements, I guess, to a certain extent. And he has to kind of right the village and save the village kind of from itself a little bit.
Right.
I'm
remembering. It's been a while.
Yeah. And I loved that section of it. And it's a long section that takes place after the actual story.
Right.
And I know the reason it wasn't in the movies is he was already being lambasted for having 17 endings.
Right.
And so if he had you could have done an entire another hour's worth of movie probably on the stuff that happens when Frodo gets back. And I'm a little sad that that's never been done in any medium before. Maybe when inevitably they turn Lord of the Rings into a series, they will tell that part of the story.
I do have a funny story about when I was not funny for me, but when I was reading Lord of the Rings, when I was I guess 9, my sister would have been 4, and we shared a room, and apparently she has told me about this, and I vaguely remember it, but I was reading Lord of the Rings, and right before bed, and I went to sleep, and apparently sat bolt upright in the middle of the night. My sister was awake, and I went, 9 riders come from the dead. And then laid back down. I went to sleep. And my sister said that was the last night she ever slept in the same room as me because she was too terrified of whatever was going on with me. Yeah.
Would you say, is there because one of the cool things also about Lord of the Rings is it has some very quotable lines. It has some lines, you shall not pass, and I'm trying to think of some of the Safe Friend and
Yeah.
Is there any quotable lines in The Hobbit in comparison?
Jeez. Now I feel like I should have done more research.
I don't know.
Well, precious. Yes, precious.
Yeah, I guess.
That's
Yeah,
the
for sure,
Hobbit,
for sure.
So
My precious.
my precious.
Yeah, my precious.
Oh, it likes these. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you say, ironically, that Gollum is probably the biggest contribution to the Lord of the Rings lore that came out of The Hobbit? Considering, I mean, I would say he's a bigger deal than Bilbo. Wouldn't you?
But not than Gandalf or than the. I'm sort of. I guess he's a bigger deal if what you care about is the Lord of the Rings.
Well, I'm just saying, like it's taking aside characters.
Sure.
The reason I say Gandalf is a main character in both.
Right.
And I think Gandalf. I mean, you're right. Gandalf did, I guess, originate in The Hobbit. So I'm kind of thinking.
No, but if you're, the whole Lord of the Rings is Tolkien saying, "Oh man, I've got this great character and a great story, and how did this happen? And let's pick that story up and go with it," which is wonderful.
The other crazy thing about Lord of the Rings, and I think this is one of the, wasn't too long after I read Lord of the Rings that I started creating my own worlds. I actually created a world before Lear. Lear, by the way, is the world that I created. For those of you who are watching this podcast but aren't watching Dungeon Call, would be a very strange group of people, because I think if you're watching this, you're probably also watching Dungeon Call. But I created that world, the world of Lear. But again, this gave me the impetus to start doing that, because the world building in this
it's exquisite.
Is crazy. Yeah. Like all the history that he has. And if you look in the appendices, he goes through all the history of all the different things. And I loved the idea of that. I didn't necessarily love it enough to read the Silmarillion.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that book is unreadable. Honestly.
Yeah. No,
the way I described it because my wife I believe she had not read Lord of the Rings until we met. So she was in her mid to high 20s when she read them. And she asked, well, should I continue with the Silmarillion? And I said, you remember the part of the Bible where they talk about people begetting people?
Yeah.
That's basically the Silmarillion.
Right,
it would be just that section of the Bible, but set in the Lord of the Rings universe.
Yeah.
Because it's just so hard to read.
Yeah,
have you read it?
I have tried.
I've tried too.
It's a very, very dry history of a very, very made up place, and it's like, what's the point?
And unfortunately, by the time I was interested in reading that, my dad was no longer going on the expeditions. Or I could have tried to bring that with me and see what I could do.
And that's a nice way to bring that back.
I think so. Yeah. In fact, that may be a nice way to wrap up the entire experience.
I'm happy to do that.
So there you have Lord of the Rings
and The Hobbit.
Yeah. Mostly Lord of the Rings.
Also, more The Hobbit.
When you say The Hobbit, though, is part of Lord of the Rings to a certain extent.
I would say,
like when you say Lord of the Rings.
Sure.
Does that not encompass The Hobbit? Really? I mean, realistically, it should.
If you want, sure.
Because none of the books are called Lord of the Rings. The saga is called Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, that saga.
And I would say that that is part of this saga.
Sure. Yeah. All right. I mean, it's a standalone story, but yes, absolutely.
It is a standalone story, but without Bilbo getting the ring here, this story doesn't happen.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. I mean, it
you're
really
saying
is
like a sequel. It's a lesser sequel.
I would say that it is. This is a prequel to.
I think that they are both immense works of art, which all of 20th and 21st century fantasy pays an enormous debt to, because they are so groundbreaking and they were so important and foundational in everything that has come since.
I think there is only one other series of books, which I think is what we will do the next time we talk about books. I think there's only one other series of books that have attempted the kind of world building and sequential story that Tolkien did, because that was very unusual in literature at that time. Almost everything was a one-off. You almost never had a series of books telling one extended story that started with something very different than it ended up with.
Yeah, I mean, his college mate C.S. Lewis would probably disagree with you, but yeah, sure. Like, yes, I hear what you're saying. It was
Although
not super
C.S.
common.
Lewis was a little bit later in time.
They were both professors at the same time.
I know they were professors at the same time, but I believe C.S. Lewis's book came out after The Hobbit, did it not?
I think you're.
I'd have to take a look at
we'd
it.
have to look.
But there's one who beat both of them to the punch by a significant chunk of change, like probably 30, 40 years. When did the Hobbit come out?
30s.
And I believe the first book in this series came out, or at least I believe at least was written before turn of the century. And 14 books were written in that series, which beats both of them.
Okay.
Combined.
Okay. You're just gonna.
I know what it is.
What is it?
Wizard of Oz.
The Wizard of Oz.
Oh, right. 14 books.
Yeah. L. Frank Baum.
Yeah.
Which will probably be the next book series we cover.
All right. We're going to talk about the political allegories.
We could talk about all kinds of
all
stuff,
right, all
but that'll
right.
have to wait for another week.
All right.
Again, if you have ideas of things that you would like us to cover, and the idea involves either a game, a book, a television series, or a movie, please let us know in the comments below.
And thanks for joining us. Like, thanks for being a part of our slightly rambling sometimes, but heartfelt discussion of these things that we love.
Let us know what you think of this new series. And as always, I'm Travis Oates.
I'm Dan Billet.
All right, see you next time. Ring that bell and
like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
Mofos.
Take care.
Whatever.